So today we're talking about from aging to saging. And this talk is inspired by a book called that by a rabbi, how do I say it? Zalman Schachter Shalomi, I think. And I read this book so long ago. Like I have no idea when I read it. But it was an amazing book about becoming mentors for the next generation. Because so often he begins with the sort of retirement age, but that's not what our whole talk's going to be about. It's going to be about the journey of a spiritual life through from birth to death. But in his place, we start with retirement. And he said, the hardest thing about retirement is in many societies, we have no idea what to do once we retire. And he has this example, and I'm going to say it incorrectly because it's been too long since I read the book, but he basically said that it's like all through our life there are these train tracks, and we're going along the track and everything's fine, and maybe it's great or maybe it's horrible or whatever, but we're going along, and then all of a sudden we retire and management just stopped building tracks, and we're just sort of like, well, like, now what do we do? Like, what do we do now? And he was saying how this is so often what retirement feels like. And he said, what happened there? And then we say, oh, well, these are the elders of the community. And he questioned this and he says, are they? Are they elders? Or are they just older? And this is an interesting thing because elders, we assume, are wise mentors, people that we can go to who have great wisdom. And the reality is that's not really the case. That a lot of people who are older are just older. And so he kind of delves into why. Why is that? And again, so the point of this talk is at any point in our life, in any point of our journey, whether we are, 18 years old or we're 88 years old, we can start today. We can shift this paradigm. We can shift this in our life. And that's really the point here. And the question becomes, what is the difference between someone who is just simply older? Because, I don't know about your experience, but a lot of people I know who are older, they're just stuck in their ways. Like, they're just like, and here's, like, they almost become more black and white with time, like more rigid with time, more judgmental with time. Not everybody, obviously, but there's a pattern, right? And the question becomes, why is that? Why don't they become elders? Like, what is that? So the foundation of his book is all about imagining life like a spiritual journey. And we've talked about this in some other talks. And because so often it's like our life is sort of this weird unconscious experience. We're sort of born into a family. It's good, it's bad, it's awful, it's great, whatever. Then we go to work and we sort of blindly just join the machine, and then we work and we suffer and we have good times and bad times. And then and we maybe have kids or we don't or whatever. And then all of a sudden we retire and we're just like, well, now what? It gets sort of this empty, experience. And all we are at the end is really tired. It sounds kind of depressing, but it's a very common situation. So he said, imagine instead, so in the Hindu belief, there's a idea of a spiritual journey. That instead of life being about work and accumulating money and getting some kind of spiritual or some kind of financial success or social cred, like someone said that to me the other day, they were really feeling down about themselves and they were talking about these friends that had kind of dissed them and set them aside. And I said, why are you caring about what these people think? And she said, well, they have a lot more social cred than I do. And, for anyone who English isn't your first language, it's almost like social credit, like because they have money or they are, I don't know, a doctor or they are whatever, they have more social credit. Like that's important. You know that our life is about climbing the social ladder so that we are, I don't know, closer to king or something. So it's kind of a weird goal, especially one day you turn 60 and you retire and you're like, okay, this doesn't even matter, right? And that's really a hard pill to swallow. That after 60 years of trying to develop financial and social credit, nobody cares. That's like really hard to swallow. So instead, he said, imagine your life as a spiritual journey. So it's not a journey of accumulation, it's not a journey of physical success, it's a spiritual path. And he said there's 4 aspects of this. He didn't make this up, this comes from Eastern traditions. The first is the student or child, where we are totally dependent on parents or someone to care for us. Then is the stage of the householder, where we are now independent. We now have to take care of ourselves and contribute to society in some way. Then there is the forest dweller. This is the age of retirement. This is sort of where we're sort of pivoting on this interesting forest dweller phase, which is what we're going to talk about the most in our talk today. And then the final stage is sage. And if you imagine looking at each one of these times of our life, but looking at them through the filter of a spiritual journey, this changes everything. Because it isn't about the success, it's about the experience of trying to be successful. It's about the experience of marriage. It's about the experience of struggle. It's about the experience of achievement. It's not about the achievement or the goal or the marriage or the children or anything. It's about the spiritual journey, the spiritual experience of all those things. So imagine if we look at each one of these phases, and if we look at it through the lens of this idea. So, and if you even imagine, if you look at each one of us, we're here on Insight Timer, so, we're considering interesting spiritual, metaphysical, energetic things. So we talk about things like the chakras. And this is a pretty common thing in the yogic world. So we look at the chakras. And if you go down to the root, right, at your perineum, this is our connection into the village. If you come up to the second chakra, this is how I interact with you. This is how I interact with other. This is duality, right? Then I come to the third chakra. This is my definition. This is for some reason why my soul was made this way. This is our uniqueness, our absolute, if we were all living together in a village, we are all unique, and that uniqueness contributes perfectly to the village, right? We don't want to all be the same. We want to be unique. That is the ideal third chakra, right? So this is our lower triangle. This is our connection into the village. This is where we seriously are in the householder and child phase, right? We are in the world experiencing this place that we got dropped into, right? Up here, we look at the crown chakra. This is our divine connection. This is our connection to infinity, God, however you understand that. We all have a 7th chakra. Some of us aren't more spiritual than others. We are all spiritual and physical, right? Then we have our third eye, which is where we listen. We listen to infinity. How do we possibly listen to infinity? There's no yes or no or right or wrong or black or white. There's none of that. You just listen and you hear your guidance. It's sort of it's interesting when you kind of connect your third eye and your third chakra, right? What is this soul meant to hear in this moment? This soul, just me. What am I meant to hear right now? As I, connect into infinity, what resonance lands in this interesting creation, right? And then our throat chakra. How do we share that? How do we share divinity with the world? How do we share our interesting perspective of the infinite with the world? So we call this the upper triangle. And then, of course, what connects the upper and the lower triangle is the heart, which is why love, as easy as it is to say this word, is so important. Because this is what connects the spiritual aspect of us with our physical life, and vice versa. It's also what asks us when we're in our physical world to connect up into our spiritual self and bring those things together. This is where we are a complete human, when we are fully divine and fully physical. So now let's imagine this interesting journey that we go on in life. We are born into a specific place, right? We are born, this is my definition of self, I am born into a specific family. So we go through a period of time where we are dependent. Whoever that is, maybe they're amazing. Maybe they create an amazing space for us to grow and thrive and live and, learn. Maybe it's extremely dysfunctional. Maybe that dependency is very painful and hard. Regardless, this is the journey of this time, right? This soul is having this experience in full dependency. Now let's imagine that. It's funny, oftentimes in past classes we've talked about reparenting ourselves. And in a lot of ways, this is an interesting journey at any stage of life, to actually imagine what we're talking about here. So imagine in an ideal situation, there's no such thing. There only is what is. But if you were to imagine a spiritual path and a child, in the child student phase, we were able to actually learn all the things that we were. We were able to embrace whatever gifts we were given, whatever challenges we were given, and we were given the freedom to experience all that. And it's a real challenge because in a lot of families, whether they were kind or unkind, we've internalized a lot of external systems that says, no, but you have to act this way and you have to look this way and you can't say those things and you have to get this kind of education and you have to, there's a lot of things that have been brought into even very functional families, which actually really inhibit that growth of that child, that spiritual expression of the child, So it's very interesting to be able to look at that child phase. So again, no, we'll come back to that. So imagine we live out this strange time of the child student, whatever it looks like, right? Whatever that experience, and it could have been that you weren't with your birth parents, that you were raised by someone else. It could be that you were raised here, but regardless, there's a certain period of our life that we are dependent. And whatever structure we are put in, that is where we have to grow. That is where we have to experience, right? So now the next phase is the householder. And the householder phase can look like anything. It can simply be that first time you move out and you're paying your own bills, you're paying rent, and you realize, okay, I've got to work now. Well, I guess all I can do is do that job. Okay, I'll do that. And the journey becomes, how do I pay rent making minimum wage? Or maybe your householder phase doesn't begin till you complete college or university. Up until that point, maybe you're still a dependent because someone's paying your way. Or maybe you start paying your way before you start school. So this, you know what I mean? So it's as soon as you begin that independent phase where you are no longer at the whim of anyone else, you are now walking your own path. So imagine how juicy this is from a spiritual perspective, because now we are responsible. Every single choice we make is up to us. We might want to blame our parents or blame this or blame that, but we are now making choices. Our soul is now making choices. Maybe we're making choices based on the filters of our childhood. Very, 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 very likely. Maybe we are making independent choices against everything we experienced in our childhood. Also possible. Maybe we're making choices based on karma that we're not even aware of. Maybe we're working out interesting patterns and experiences and stories from multiple lifetimes, and we're just sort of kicking through them going, why do I keep repeating this pattern? Like, who knows what it's all about? But this is the stage of life where it is us making the choices. And that changes everything when we look at it from a spiritual perspective. Now suddenly maybe we are in relationship. Maybe we're married. Maybe we chose to stay single. Maybe we've been divorced. Maybe we're on our fourth spouse. Who knows, right? It's not really relevant. The details don't matter. What matters is I'm having an experience of love, or I'm having an experience of a lack of love, or I'm having an experience of the pain of love, or the pain of dependency. Maybe I'm experiencing codependency, narcissism, gaslighting. Maybe I'm experiencing extreme love and safety that I've never experienced in my whole life. But the key is that I am experiencing it. And in that time, I'm making choices. Period. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. I'm just making choices. This soul is having an experience in relationship and making different interesting choices. Maybe for the first time, we've got to make money to pay the way. How do we do it? Well, this is a new experience. Do I dig into my gifts and do something that, calls to my soul? Or does my soul kind of lie in hobbies and things I do otherwise, but I do this job because that's how I pay the bills? How do I balance that? How do I balance that with family and relationships? Like, the householder time is extremely interesting. There's a million moving parts, right? Especially if we sort of dropped into that classical model that, well, I finished school, I got married, I had children, I worked, I paid the mortgage, I had 2 cars, I did, all that stuff, right? That's just it's just an idea, but there's a lot of moving parts there. Got to get the kids to hockey. There's my Canadian coming out. Got to get this, got to do this, got to make the money, got to upgrade, got to sell the house, got to flip the house, got to get a second car, got to fix the car. So-and-so needs braces. There's a million things in the householder time. But this is the arena where we really learn about life. This is the arena where this infinite soul comes down into the earth and really has an experience. It doesn't matter what the experience is. They're having an experience, right? So at some point, 50, 60, 70, who knows, at some point, the householder phase ends. And this is what's really interesting, because in a lot of societies, at this point, it's almost like you're just supposed to die. Like, if you're not being of use to society, if you're not raising children, and if you're not working, well, you know what? We'll just put you over there and you can play cards, and we'll sign you up for a painting class. And it's almost like let's just keep them busy until, because there's really nothing for them to do. Like, it's this weird, horrible thing where all that matters is, Tuesday is the day I get groceries and Wednesday is the day I go to this thing, right? And it's like, no, on a spiritual path, this is the time to look back on our life. This is the time to mine the experiences that we've just had. We now have the time to breathe. We don't have a million moving parts. We're not worried about paying the rent. We're not worrying about which school the kids are in or all these. We're not worried about all that. We have time to breathe. So now imagine you sit and you look back over your life from this spiritual perspective. It's kind of like, my sister, she always says, but what does this look like from 50,000 feet? So no matter what we're going through, can we rise to 50,000 feet and kind of see the big picture? That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in the forest dweller phase. So in the forest dweller phase, theoretically, you give up all your belongings, your house, your connections into the community, or the expectations in the community, and you head off into the forest to, have deep thoughts and look at everything, right? Theoretically, it's a metaphor for however you want to do it. But the key is, we're not in the householder phase anymore, and nor do we want to be. We actually want the freedom to look at it all. So suddenly we look and we go, wow, those were hard years. Why were they so hard? Well, it probably had something to do with my upbringing. Yeah, I can see that. The fear in my mom definitely influenced me there. That definitely affected how I raised my kids. Yeah, and I can really see how this stuff, that thing that happened when I was 8, wow, that really put a pile of fear in me. And that definitely influenced me when I got married, because I didn't really trust people. Interesting. Oh man, in that first job, I was so afraid of doing the wrong thing. And wow, I was really at the whim of authority at that time. Interesting. Like, to really be able to look at ourselves and be able to say, wow, that was a dumb choice. That sounds a lot more judgmental than I would be. But at the same time, and we made choices based on where we were at, right? And we can look back at it and go, huh. People often ask me, they say, if you could do anything different in your marriage, if you could have had a different outcome, would you have changed it? And the interesting thing is, I look back on my marriage and I think, wow, what an experience. I was 23 when I got married, and we really tried and we really did our best. And we brought all of our good and bad qualities from our parents and our past karmas and who knows what else. And we really tried. And sometimes it was really hard and sometimes it was really amazing. But they were just great experiences. Not about changing them. They're just about, I learned so much. You guys don't have to, a lot of you guys have been in a lot of my talks, and I reference my marriage a lot because I learned so much. And the beautiful thing about this forest dweller phase is, if we're really honest with ourselves, it brings incredible humility. I've never met anyone who's really done the work, who's really looked back on their life, who didn't come out of it really humble. Because we're all just trying. We really start to realize, yeah, could I have done that differently? Sure. Could I have done that? Yeah, but I didn't. And here's why. And that's okay. But there's real humility. And this humility is so important in the forest dweller phase. It is so important if the role of the elder is to be a mentor for the next generation. We must begin with a foundation of humility. Nobody wants advice from someone who thinks they're all that in a bag of chips, right? Nobody. It's because you kind of know deep down that they're telling themselves a story. They're convincing themselves of how important they were, what great choices they made, and if you could just do things like they did, then you too could be successful like them. And it's my favorite people to get advice for is when I can kind of rant on and they kind of go, yeah, I don't know, that's a lot. Those are my favorite people, because that they're going, yeah, because we resonate with that place of unknowing. We resonate, and it doesn't matter how old we are. It's that place where we know that if we continue to grow, there's no end to learning, right? So anyone who thinks that, oh yeah, I've got this figured out, I was in a place once that is sort of known for being a very spiritual mecca. And I was doing these talks, about various things, and I couldn't quite figure out why the talks weren't going well. Like normally if I'm sitting in a room of people, it's kind of juicy and fun and we tell stories and we do stuff, and it's not, I'm not self-deprecating, but we talk about real stuff, right? And we kind of do, but I couldn't get that. Like the people were just distant or something. I couldn't find that in Dutch, that gezellig, that connection, that something that connected us. So then later I was sitting with this woman after, and I said, I can't understand the mojo of this group. I just don't get it. I couldn't connect with anybody. And she said, well, you have to understand that this place, it really attracts the spiritual graduates of the world. And I apologize for my cattiness in this moment. But I just looked at her and I'm like, how do you graduate in an infinite world? There's no such thing. Like, there's no such thing as a spiritual graduate. And then I realized that whatever path these folks had gone on, I sound awfully judgmental here, but they actually thought they'd reached the top in a spiritual world. And I was like, that we are always growing. Every single one of us. I don't care if we're 90 years old. There is more to explore. There is more to experience. Whether it's out there or inside or whatever, there is always more to learn. And yeah, there's so much to look at. So it's really interesting, like in this forest dweller phase, and this is something, again, we can all do. Like when people say, oh, you've got to do the work, well, that person hasn't done the work and this person did do the work, all that kind of stuff. So what's the work? Well, the work is bringing ourselves to 50,000 feet. Sometimes it's diving in to the emotions of things, right? So it's sort of this interesting balance between, if you imagine your chakras, right? So imagine us as the human. Let's say this, we start at the heart and we sort of span out to our 50,000 feet spiritual connection to the infinite, to the big picture, all the way down to our core, to our perineum, where we are 100% all into the emotion, the pain, the happiness, the thrill, the ecstasy, the whole piece. And we actually experience all of it. And you sit in the forest dweller phase and you remember hard times and you go, wow. Maybe you still feel the emotion of it. Maybe you still feel the pain of it. Maybe you still are angry about it. It's not that we have to have solved everything and have healed everything. What if we're still like really furious about it because that was awful, and but maybe we still say that in the forest dweller phase. We go, wow, I am still angry about that. Interesting. Right? But we're conscious. We're looking at these things going, because we're looking at it objectively. I've often talked of the koshas. In yoga, we talk about the 5 koshas, and I don't know what they all are, like the Mana Mayakosha, Ana Mayakosha, which is, one is the body, one is the mind, the Prana Mayakosha. Anyway, the point is, my favorite kosha is called the Vishnyana Mayakosha, and it's called the Wisdom Sheath. It's the aspect of us. So imagine, there's the physical body, there's the mental body, there's the breath, there is our ecstatic body, the Ananda Mayakosha, our connection to God. What joins our connection to God and this physical? They call it the Vishnyana Mayakosha. The word doesn't matter. But this sheath is our wisdom sheath. And that's where we enter in this forest dweller phase, because the key parts of it is kindness, no judgment, total love. So now we look at our entire life with no judgment. And we just look at ourselves with total love and say, wow, that was hard. Or we think, wow, what a blessing that time was. Interesting. this is the work. To look at our relationships, to look at our relationship with money, career, contributions to society or to the village. Even our own personal journey, like how hard those householder times are when we're trying to balance our own soul's journey with caring for others and worrying about what that person thinks, our struggles with codependency, our struggles with authority, the things we didn't say, the things we could have said. That's a lot to ponder. So the householder, the forest dweller phase is also a very juicy time, right? It's a very juicy, interesting time to ponder. And when that time is complete, we move on to the sage. And the sage, these are the elders, right? We're not chewing on this stuff anymore. If you walk up, I mean, the typical vision of the sage is the what's the word? Like a sadhu in India sitting on the side of the road, and they begging. We call it begging. It's such a negative thing over in the West, but they don't need to contribute anymore. They don't need to make money. They've done all that. They have greater things to contribute to the world now. And really, how much money do you need in a day? Right? Enough money to buy some bread and a bit of food? It requires very, very little. So to sit with a true elder and say, here's what's going on in my life, and I'm really struggling with it. What are they going to tell you? They've lived the child, whether it was positive, negative, hard, easy. They've lived the householder. They've struggled with all those balances and difficulty. They've mined all those experiences from 50,000 feet. And now they sit with you. And effortlessly, the number one thing they do is they just hold space and let you talk. They create a space of total non-judgment and understanding and humility. So what does that do for the person seeking advice? It allows them to dig deeper. It allows them to really be honest with what's going on at that point. They're not telling stories. They're not pretending. They're not telling themselves stories. They're not telling you the stories they're telling themselves. Because the silence of the sage will actually make them back up and go, well, that's not really true. There's actually this too, right? And because the sage has seen the big picture, because what's really interesting is when we look back on our life, we can kind of, we can sort of go in like a point and go, oh, look at that one thing I did. I shouldn't have done that. Or look at that thing that person did. Look at that one thing, right? But when we back up and we see how it fits into the whole picture, changes everything. So the sage, if someone comes and they're really focused on the one thing, the sage knows, like, they're like going, what else is going on? What else is affecting you right now? What are the other players in your life? Well, there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And then as you hear the whole context fill out, we have proper perspective. And then our elders are great value to society. So now imagine a society where we actually have this beautiful full circle of wisdom existing all the time. Imagine how differently we look. Imagine if this is part of our society. This is part of my favorite word right now is zeitgeist. Right? It's sort of the overriding philosophy of a society. So imagine our current zeitgeist was that we are living a spiritual journey. So in order to live that spiritual journey, we have to be 100% in the world. Like, it's not that we aren't living. We aren't separating ourselves and heading out there. We are in the world. And then we are mining the experiences, like almost like we're reporting back to our boss going, okay, so this assignment of marriage, I got to tell you what that was all about. Whew, that's something else here on planet Earth. right? Like we can actually see it like that. But now imagine if this is the current zeitgeist, this is the current philosophy, while we are in the householder phase, while we're totally experiencing everything, we also know that there's purpose in it. We know there's purpose in this difficult relationship. And instead of just being caught in the, I have to succeed at this, I have to stay together, no matter what, I have to be okay, all these kind of things, we have the awareness, because that is the current philosophy, that all things are with purpose. So then we look at this situation and we say, why am I struggling to speak my truth? Am I afraid of getting in trouble? Is this? So we already begin to look deeper at every stage, you know? So we actually start going, okay, maybe this is something genetic, like not genetic, but it's it's inherited from my mother or my grandmother. Interesting. All right, well then I'm gonna try being honest then. See how that is. Right? There's no a huge attachment to it because our only interest is the experience. Imagine how much that changes every single thing we do. Every struggle with money, every struggle with relationships, every struggle with society, with children, whatever. And we think, okay, what's another way of doing this? So this idea from aging to saging, to me, begins at birth and goes all the way to the very end. And it creates this meaning inside of every single stage of life, that the child phase matters. However it was, that's important. And the householder phase matters. Every single interesting detail so matters. And we don't have to delete parts of our lives, because that's a real danger. Sometimes we talk about the word healing, and that there are a lot of people that would say that the journey of healing is bringing back all the parts of us we've discarded, or all the parts of us we couldn't digest. And when all of those parts are able to find their home, that's when we're whole again. And that's interesting, right? When we can look at things from 50,000 feet and we can say, all right, you can come back because I understand why you appeared in my life. I understand why I needed this contrast, you know? And that's a very, I have the word magnanimous in my head, but that's a very big perspective to be able to take, especially if there's been real pain and difficulty. You said something like, all we have to do is be honest with our experience. Not try to change it. More, please. I think, so imagine we have an experience that's difficult, that's painful. I think that there's a self-preservation mechanism that rises in the moment to be able to live with what's happening. So maybe we tell a story to ourselves that says, okay, no, this is okay because of this. And it's sort of, we create a counterbalance to the experience so that we can survive it right now. And then maybe later we can look at it. But right now, I just can't. Maybe I've got too many things going on. Maybe I'm drowning in pain and trauma. So we sort of create these things that sort of balance them, and then we set them aside, right? Or maybe we have an experience, and that current state of our mind says, well, it's because of me, because there's something wrong with me. If I had done this, it's my fault. Maybe it's shame and guilt and something else that's risen, and it kind of globs onto the experience. That's where it's interesting later. It's almost like we sit and we look at all of these things where we have an experience, and then we have the thoughts that we attach to them to survive them at the time. And we can look at them and go, is that true? No, that's what I needed to know at the time to survive it. Right? And we are able to actually see the experience. It's sort of like if we're abused as children, we can't help but take it personally, that it must be something I did, or I probably asked for it, or like we don't know any better, right? These are thoughts that we can then later really torment us. And then at way later we look at it and go, no, it was just the abuser's issue. I was just a victim in that. Like it wasn't, and that's sort of where we kind of separate from the thoughts that we naturally create to survive and just the simple experience itself. Could you talk a bit more about the chakra pyramids and how they work together? It's really interesting. So if you imagine you're fully living in the lower triangle, right? You're living in this juicy life, right? Here's me, here's how I interact with others, and here's how I connect into the community. There's many interpretations of the chakras, but this is one of them. So we're all in there, right? But then we remember that, something bad happens or something difficult happens. Maybe there's a need in the community, right? And so what we do is we go up into our upper channels and we say, what's the solution here? What's the answer? And we receive guidance. And we hear the guidance, we share the guidance, we manifest something new. We experience life, we do our stuff, a question arises, maybe we're having an argument with someone, right? And we go, aha, what are some good words to help bridge this gap? I ask, I listen, I share, and something changes. It's so different because if our heart is broken, we can get stuck in the upper triangle or the lower triangle. And we can kind of stay up here lost in space, unable to manifest, unable to join society. Or we get stuck down here, not believing that we're greater and we have connection to insight and amazing things. And so this is, I think, why in our yoga and our teachings, we so focus on healing the heart. Because this is the connection between being part of the world and knowing that we're infinite, right? We need to have this. And it's interesting because the heart center in Sanskrit is anahat, which means unstruck chord. It's not meant to be, sorry. It's not meant to be full of stuff. It's supposed to be this open channel of pure love, right? Michael Owen has a great book called Carl Jung and the Native Moon Phases. Ooh, that sounds awesome. I'm divorcing at 35 years of marriage because I want to start a new story. My husband is devastated as he wanted to grow old with me. I'm not ready to grow old. I want to do over. It's so interesting when to do these things in love, right? To really be able to look at this person. I was just talking to someone the other day about this because this idea of relationships ending is so weird, in my opinion. How you ever, sometimes I even reference my ex-husband as my husband because that's the only relationship we've ever really had. I'll say, this time when my husband and I did this, and it's like, well, we've been divorced for 7 years, but, it's interesting to allow the love to continue, even if you choose not to live together, right? It's such a beautiful thing to just allow yourselves to love each other. And what they do with it, what they choose, that's really their soul's journey, right? That's just them. And we can just love them. Wonder if you can become a new you while married. Totally. And again, it's just interesting to look at our situation and back up, because one thing about when we're married, we get stuck in patterns. We get stuck in patterns of communication, that I say this and they say this and I say this and they say this, and then we kind of just go, well, there's no point even saying anything because I already know what they're going to say. Like the familiarity almost stops all growth. And this is where when we connect these pyramids, right? When we connect this and we truly bring in our infinite potential into the marriage. And we say, what can we do right now? So the last year of my marriage, we stayed together. I've told lots of you guys this because all these kids had moved into our house. So we had like 6 teenagers. And I only had 2, but we had 6. And so we stayed together for the last year. And I realized that it was really painful. I mean, I really, really, really loved him, right? And it was really, divorce is really hard. But every day I would ask, like I would literally sit in prayer, meditation, close my eyes, whatever you want to call it, or go for a walk. And I would say, do we talk about the finances today? And the answer would be no. Right? And then the question would be, do we do this today? Yes. And then it would be, okay, what are the words I can use? Here are the words. And they'd be words I'd never said before. And the outcome would be something different. And there's something about being married. If you feel called to continue to be married, which is awesome, then see if there's different words. If you feel a call to a shift, then maybe there's something different to say, right? Because magical things come out of our mouths when we want that. You know that the universe conspires once we create an intention to get us what we desire. Okay, I'm backing up. Would you please talk more about sages listening and not giving advice? I think it's kind of like, when someone says, here's my problem and here's what I want advice with. But if you've ever been there, you kind of know that I think there's more going on. I don't think this is actually the problem. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like that's sort of what's on the surface. And we don't want to talk about the surface piece. We want to go underneath. So the sage might say, so why do you think you're in that position? Or why do you think you don't have choice? Well, it's this. You know what I mean? It's kind of that if we stay on the surface, there's nothing really to talk about. That's just a sort of a drama thing. And talking about drama, especially after you've been on the planet for, 5, 6, 7, 8 decades, drama's not very interesting. And we also know how it actually just takes you somewhere you don't need to go. So they're not going to engage with drama, but they will engage if we want to go deeper, right? So I think that's maybe why there's more listening in the beginning. And then eventually maybe someone says, aha, now we've gotten to the core of it. Here's what I can tell you. But you have to listen until we get to the core, right? Can't experience stages overlap? How about a child caring for siblings within a violent household, or those who will never have a pension to retire? Totally. This is exactly it, right? I mean, how many children don't ever experience real childhood? And that's their experience, and they totally overlap. And it's interesting, yeah, like life isn't this clear, right? We kind of create the structure to be able to observe. But even then, those who will never have a pension to retire, it's an interesting world we live in of massive independence. In 2018, I gave everything away and I started traveling and I had no idea what I was doing. I like to pretend I knew, but I didn't really know. And there was a part of me that actually considered not teaching anymore and not doing all the things I'd always done. I thought, maybe you're just supposed to live with families. Maybe I'll just stay with this family for a month and take care of some kids for a little while and move on to the next place and not even do the money thing. Or maybe I'll just live there and I'll just cook for a while and then I'll move on to the next thing. Like I didn't know. Like there's a lot of, like Mary Poppins, right, honestly. Like, because we actually have so much to offer. But But this requirement of independence is very debilitating. You know, it's but to just I remember staying in a B&B before I left, and a friend and I were staying there, and it was sort of someone's house, and it was just a young couple, and they were kind of living off grid, and they were suffering. Maybe they were suffering. They were struggling, and they had little kids, and they were just running wild, like they were just really, really stressed out, and this is when I was still trying to figure out what I was really going to do when I left with no possessions. And I thought, wow. I remember as a young mom thinking what I would have given to have someone to just care for the kids for a couple hours every day. You know, just a couple hours. I didn't want to be a full-time nanny because I knew I was going to write and do other things. But how much value is that? You know? How much value is it just to, so I think there's something in this concept that really lets us back up and say, hold on a minute, you know. And even, it's interesting, even to be an elder that lives with their children or their grandchildren, to be that silent elder, to not poke our nose in when it doesn't belong, right? Like we want to say, oh, well, I'd love for my in-laws or my parents to live with me, but that would drive me crazy. Again, because we don't know how to be elders. We don't know how to be helpful. We don't remember, we've forgotten what it is to be young and busy and in that hairy householder phase. So it's interesting to kind of, in that sage and forest dweller phase, to go, wow, what if I really backed off and just helped out and contributed in small ways, but really, really helpful ways. Well, I feel like my parents are still a householder. Exactly. Because that's one of the challenges in our society, is because we're not told that there's anything interesting and important beyond householder, we get stuck continuing in householder. We keep the big house. We need the income. We're the ones that host everything. Like, we continue this householder phase long after it's done. You know, and maybe it comes from historically, you know, not having birth control and having babies until you die. I don't know, but it's a real thing that we just get stuck in it because it's the only time that we felt of value and life was interesting and there were moving parts. So that's why this talk is so powerful and exciting to me, and this whole concept. And I'm so grateful for this book that I read so many years ago, because it not only gives meaning to the second half of our life, which, in my opinion, at the age of 52, I think, I love this second part. I love. I look forward to every single year. I love this time of life. I love having all these experiences behind me. I love realizing where I screwed up, and I love that. I think it's awesome. And to actually understand that this is a really incredible, juicy, fantastic time of life. And when we get that, we can really enjoy previous times. You know, when we're 30 or we're 20 or we're 12, we can actually go, well, you know what? This is going to be quite a ride, right? It's really, really lovely. My parents want to be in that phase. It's affecting my independence. It feels like they can't let go of, which directly reflects a relationship, right? It's a real challenge. And I think sorry, thank you. I'm just reading your awesome, lovely thoughts, and I really appreciate it. Again, I think it's interesting to be able to bring this perspective to our real lives, right? Our real lives where we have parents that didn't have the benefit of these teachings. You know, this book, I don't know when he wrote it, whether it was in the 90s, you know, but we can still bring this perspective and this love and this understanding. But mostly we can bring our insight, that when we're sitting with our parents, we sit and we pray for guidance, that we don't know the answers. We don't know we don't know from even our own experience, because we've never been in their position. So when we're sitting with them, we sit quietly and we say, what can I say now in love that helps? And allow whatever to come out, you know? For those struggling with marriage, it helped when we moved into separate bedrooms. You know what's really amazing about that is I have a good friend who I've spoken about a few times, and she actually grew up, she didn't grow up, but she lived in the Osho ashrams for a long time. When she turned 16, she actually moved into the ashrams. And Osho used to teach that even if you're married, you should have separate bedrooms, because you should never forget that you are an independent person, that you are a soul, you are a sovereign being, you are a unique incarnation of God here on the planet. And even though you have chosen to marry, you are not this other person, you are not the complement of this other person, because we will we will lose our connection here, because we will kind of integrate sideways instead of remaining individual people. And so my friend, for her whole life, she always had her own bedroom, during marriage, during children, during everything. And I find this fascinating, and I think I love this idea, because one, it doesn't, in my opinion, in my experience, it doesn't actually take away from intimacy, because the intimacy becomes very real. And you can still have little sleepovers. But when you need your own space, you have your own space. And then, who was it? Who's the woman who wrote Esther Perel, Breeding in Captivity, or something like that? And she talks about how neurons, in order to have a spark, there has to be a space between the synapses. And if you lose the space between the synapses, there's no spark. And this is one of the blessings, I think, of separate bedrooms, is that it allows the space. And it's not some intentional space because you're angry. It's a beautiful space that creates two individual people who choose to be together and choose to be each other's most significant others. And I kind of think that that's how you keep the honeymoon period for your whole life and keep growing and expanding together. It's a great idea. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. I live in a multi-generational house. My mom has begun feeling more burdened with being what she has created in her role. I started picking up more to lighten her load, to just do what makes her happy, but now she feels unneeded. How do we find that common ground? I feel at peace doing it all because I have the heart to do it. So, not knowing your whole situation, but the first thing that comes to me is, it's always interesting when we start doing things for our elders, right? It's like, oh, don't worry, I'll get that. Someone drops something, oh, here, I'll get it. It's like, no, let them get it. It's important to be mobile. It's important to get down on the ground and pick that up. Oh, it's okay, I'll get your water. It's like, no. Everybody needs to stay mobile. Everybody needs to actually do all the things. And I fully understand it, because that's certainly my tendency. It's like, oh, it's okay, I'll get it. And I actually find myself so often today, right now, in my current life, the number of times I'm around someone and I jump to do it for them. Old, young, doesn't matter. I just jump to help. And it's like, I'm not helping. And so there's something really interesting about, because one of the weird things about our elders is we've almost made them like incapacitated or unable. And anyway, this is a really current thing in my life right now, that when I'm with my dad or I'm with anyone who's older, to just don't jump. and it's almost too, there's something weird woven in there about respect, that we're supposed to do this for our elders, and it shows respect. And it's like, I don't know, just it's an interesting thing to balance and play with, right? What age does elders start at? I don't know. I think it's all different for everybody. And I think, to some earlier points, I think there's a lot of overlap. I think depending on our life, there may be more overlap than others. And, it's funny, the thought coming into my mind is, maybe there really is no delineation. Imagine, because this is the thing, what we do, right? We look at everything in chunks, in fragments, and you imagine, like, what if right now I am all those things? What if I am child? What if I am householder? What if I am sage? What if I am forest dweller? And what if I oscillate and swim around in all of them all the time? Right? At this age, maybe it means I am manifesting this right now. I'm walking through this phase of life. But it's like I'm always revisiting my childhood and playing with the options. And I'm always revisiting my householder phase and playing with the options. And maybe I even have a taste of sage, and I can kind of feel that also. And that helps me expand. Maybe we're all playing in it all the time. It's a great question. So thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.